This episode of Market Talk is brought to you by Growmark FS. Keeping up on the latest in ag is a challenge, to say the least, but there are experts nearby ready to help. You'll find them at your local FS. You can trust them to bring you customized agronomic grain and energy solutions born of the latest thinking. That's because FS specialists receive continuous training that keeps them current on the latest trends, practices, and technologies. So you'll get local expertise that's both exceptional and up to date. Visit fssystem.com to learn how FS is bringing you what's next. And joining us now here on Market Talk, we like to catch up with him once a month and get his thoughts and insight on what's happening in agriculture. Richard Fordyce, Business Growth Director for Agriculture with Osborne Bar Paramore, is with us. Richard, good to catch up with you again, sir. How are you today?
I am doing great, Jesse. Always good to catch up with you as well.
Thanks for the time as always. And, it feels like every month you and I sit down and talk, and we have no shortage of topics to discuss. And sometimes it's some of the same topics, and then other times it's new topics that have hit the agriculture world. Let's talk about some of just harvest before we really dive into things. Talk about what you're seeing in your neck of the woods there in Northwest Missouri. How is that harvest progressing along? What are you hearing?
Well, yeah, and you and I visited just a little bit before this, and it's kind of weird, but like we just talked about before we went on air, every year is a little weird. So, we've got places that we've got farmers, growers that started in the cornfield, a couple of weeks ago, and places where soybeans are not ready. There's other places not far away that farmers started in the soybean field and are just now, starting in the cornfield. So there's not I should say I drove from Jefferson City, Missouri to Bethany, where we farm on Tuesday. And from Jefferson City north, there's not much out. And you kind of you start making your way west, and you get to see there's a little bit more activity. And then northwest, so as we went up I-35 and kind of got closer to home, that's where the most activity was, where there were more acres that had already been harvested. So, and I don't know, as we go on north from there, even what the progress is, but we're in our area, we were pretty fortunate and got some timely rainfall, maybe 2 or 3 times, during the growing season, where we had a day or 2 or 3 of stress and then got some rain. And I don't know. All I've heard is corn yields are really good. Nobody has given me a bushel per acre. We actually just started in the cornfield yesterday evening, so we don't have a field completed, but it's pretty good. We've done quite a few acres of soybeans, and they're in that 60 bushel range. I think, from a yield perspective, I think we knocked some of the extreme top out of that yield with this, dry August, dry September. And, you can always add some bushels if you get some late season rains.
Very true. Well, and your thoughts there, it kind of goes along with what I'm hearing from a lot of growers across parts of the Corn Belt, that despite all the heat and dryness we saw in many areas, yields are a little bit better than expected. Maybe not a bumper crop, not a record, but still a little bit better than expected. And that seems to be, that shatter is maybe making its way into the futures markets a little bit here, giving us just a little bit of that seasonal harvest pressure on top of everything else impacting the market trade right now, Richard.
Yeah, I think so. 30 days ago, we were seeing some gains in the market where I think it was weather and yield prediction kind of driven. And I do think things are a little better. Now, again, this is not to say that there are going to be places, within the Corn Belt where they're going to see some pretty disappointing yields, I think. But, again, I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but, the genetics and the innovation and discovery within, corn hybrids and soybean varieties, they're just better. And they're able to withstand some of that weather stress in a way that they hadn't been able to, in the past. And I think, whether it's plant breeders and, in either the corn side or the soybean side, there are those, obviously those positive traits that, that are allowing that crop to just not be devastated by some dry weather or hot weather. And so, I think as we see progress in those developments, I think we'll continue to have opportunities where, I remember years when I first started farming, a growing season like we had this year, maybe not exactly here, but a little south of here, there wouldn't have been much out there. And it's just a lot better than it used to be.
Definitely. Well, let's turn our attention to a few other topics that are impacting ag, impacting the markets. The rail issue. Now, we had a lot of talk about the rail strike. It seemingly has been averted, although we're still waiting on a vote by the union. So, doesn't feel like we're completely out of the woods yet. But the markets, everything else, have kind of put this story on the back burner. But we got to think about this a little bit and wait till we get that final confirmation, Richard.
That is true. And, if we just think back almost a month ago, that was headline news. And you can imagine, what that would do to basis, what that would do just to harvest progress, frankly, if we didn't have rail cars running. And, luckily we were able to avert that. And, I think that was due to a lot of parties wanting to get together and have a resolution. But you're exactly right. So I think there are 12 or maybe 15 unions that need to ratify that agreement. And I think at this point there are 4 that have ratified the agreement. The rest have yet to do it. I think it is 12 because I think there's 8 left to ratify. And from all sources that I've talked to, they will hopefully the remaining 8 unions will have that ratified by hopefully mid-November. And it's not that I don't think it's that they disagree with the agreement. It's that their structure and their process for approving, the new agreement, they're all different, right? So when they have an opportunity to bring their folks in to vote, or how that voting process works, most folks are pretty optimistic that the unions will approve this new agreement.
And you think about the rail issue, and if there potentially was something that wasn't approved by one of the unions and we ended up having a strike, you combine that with now the issue that seemingly is headline news, the low river levels on the Mississippi, and what that's doing to basis along the river, what that's doing for transportation, not only of grains down to the Gulf, but fertilizer upriver. I mean, I can't even imagine. One, that's a big issue, but 2, if something were to happen and we had both a rail strike and low water levels, that could be catastrophic for ag, Richard. I hate to be doom and gloom, but that's something to keep at the back of our minds, I think.
It is. And interestingly, as you mentioned, I'm business growth director for OBP, and we had most of our agency. We were in St. Louis last week, to come together as an agency and talk about, what we do and, why we do it and what's important. And we were on the river. So we were on a boat on the river at St. Louis. And, we were able to, show firsthand the folks that work at the agency what's happening on the river. Like, what are these terminals? Why are they there? What are they doing? And there was some activity that day. I think it was last Thursday. And so we had a chance to talk about what these low river levels mean. And so, when you think about the lower Mississippi, and that's really what we're talking about, is St. Louis and south to New Orleans. That is not a lot. That segment of the river does not have locks and dams. So it's very difficult to control levels and water levels and how deep the draft of these barges can be. Well, so what we're hearing is, there's a couple of things that are going to impact this if we don't see some improvement in the water level. One is the draft of an individual barge, right? So if you think about, it's like if you're going to town with your truck, you can only load your truck 3/4 full. That's the same situation we're having with the barges right now. And then, so it's depth, but it's also width. So because the lower Miss does not have, locks and dams, some of these barge tows can be 25 or 30 barges. Well, they're limiting the width of those barge tows as well. So no matter what happens, I think I'm safe in saying this, no matter what happens, we're going to see an impact of lower capacity on the lower miss for this harvest season. The weather forecasters are not forecasting any, big sustained rainfalls that are going to have runoff that are going to feed into the river to raise those levels. And so that's going to be an issue. I think, again, it's going to affect basis. I think you'll have some terminal markets, some ports along the river that will be impacted more than others. And we're already hearing of some port facilities at these locations that the water level is in some cases low enough that they can't even get the barges in there. So this is going to be something certainly to watch and for producers to think about, what's happening to those soybeans and that corn or whatever going downriver. And then certainly, as you mentioned, Jesse, those inputs that are coming up the river.
A lot of things to definitely keep our eyes on. And I think about issues like this. It's coming at a time where, again, we're seeing continued high prices for inputs. And we're hearing about OPEC cutting oil production. What's that going to do to gas and diesel prices here moving into the fall and winter months? And we think about the fertilizer energy issues that we've been seeing. It's stories like this, Richard, that I can't imagine what farmers are thinking about and looking at as they start preparing for next year's crop. I know we're busy with harvest, but we got to be thinking about 2023 as well right now.
You're exactly right. And I think there's a good bit of nervousness, in the countryside right now. And it truly does, as you indicated, it truly does, really revolve around energy costs. Because if you think about, the cost to transport goods, the tires that go on a truck, the petroleum component in fertilizer, specifically nitrogen production, just the cost of everything. When you have higher energy costs, the cost of everything goes up. And, I think it's certainly a strategic move by OPEC or OPEC plus, to limit some of the availability. And it may be timed. I don't know. I don't want to get into any political conversation here, but, it seems peculiar, maybe, that the timing of this is when it is. So, we've got midterm elections coming up. What does that mean? I don't know, but I do know just locally here, I know diesel fuel's gone up in the last week. It's gone up 20, 30 cents. Gasoline's gone up 20 or 30 cents. And I haven't been to town this morning, so I don't know. It may have gone up again today.
Well, it's something that we have to keep our eye on. There's just so much there when it comes to input costs going to next year, and thinking about our livestock folks as well. Input costs, a big topic there, especially the cost of feed. Yeah, we're seeing high corn prices, high wheat prices, but what's that translate into for our cattle guys? Well, high feed costs. And you think about also the drought issues that we've seen in feedlot country this year, a lack of feed available. So we're going to have to probably look at trucking it in, bringing it in by rail from other areas. I know, talking to ranchers, that's a big topic right now, Richard.
It is, and I certainly, I grow corn and soybeans. We also raise cattle. We don't feed cattle, but, I know every time when I say we don't feed cattle, we don't feed fat cattle. We do put some grain through our cattle. And, every time we load the grinder with corn, I'm not writing a check for it, but it's that opportunity cost. That could be going to town and being sold. So certainly we have more in, our heifers and our bred heifers and those kinds of things. And it certainly is an issue. And so when you think about that, depending on what sector in the cattle market you're in, you may realize higher prices, and we are seeing higher prices, in feeder cattle and fed cattle. But I don't know that it's at the level of an increase that we've seen on the grain side, right? But I've had a lot of conversations lately with folks that have some knowledge about agriculture, but they're not farmers, but they're noticing in the grocery store, right?
Hmm.
Chicken is probably twice the cost it was, a year and a half ago. And they're wanting to know what's driving that. Well, what's driving that is the fact that, what gets you to that chicken breast that's in the grocery shelf is a lot of corn and a lot of soybean meal. And when those costs are going up, especially, more vertically integrated industries, in the poultry side and the pork side, they're able to maybe offset some of that cost, but ultimately the producer, and it's just feeding into this whole inflation number, the consumer's paying a lot more at the grocery store than they were a year and a half ago.
Yeah, it's very, very true, and I think it's it's a tough time for a lot of folks, both on the ag side and consumers as well. You mentioned the grocery store, and I know I go to the grocery store, and there's certain things I want to buy that just can't right now because they're
Really?
just too high priced, Richard. It's definitely tough times with everything, and that's more of an inflation monetary discussion, which of course is still a big issue, but that's something else that I'm sure that would take us down a totally different road here today, Richard, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit about DC. I know you brought up some different political thoughts, and I want to get your insight on what's happening in Washington. We're taking Senate recess. I know there's a few things that we're still waiting on. Alexis Taylor hasn't been confirmed. Doug McCaleb hasn't been confirmed. Thoughts are that that's going to be now after the midterm elections. I mean, you think about some of these key positions for trade, et cetera, at USDA and USTR that haven't been confirmed. I know agriculture is just waiting and waiting and waiting for these to get confirmed.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure I understand why that happened, right? So we had three up for confirmation.
Hmm.
One had a vote, the other two didn't. I know Alexis pretty well. I think she'll be great in that role. She's gonna bring knowledge, about American agriculture and trade to that role. I've been snooping around a little bit. I can't seem to get an answer as to why those votes didn't happen. But anyway, obviously they didn't, and you're correct. I think obviously that vote hopefully will take place after the midterms. But we saw it when we were in Washington as well. You got good people that are, they're literally on the sideline, they're ready to go, and for whatever reason, they get held up. And when there's a political component to it, there could be something that we're not even aware of as for a reason as to why that vote didn't take place or whatnot. But it's frustrating. It's frustrating, from an agriculture advocate's perspective, that those seats aren't filled right now. And so, hopefully that'll resolve itself, either after the recess or after the midterms. And we'll start to get those seats filled at USDA.
Well, and I wonder too if it does wait till after the midterms, if there is big changes in the Senate, one way or another, what that could potentially do to any confirmation. There's obviously always a lot of chatter around, will seats flip? I know this is going to be a pretty contentious midterm election, and agriculture is going to be squarely, in the crosshairs of this by who is elected and who is not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you look at polling numbers and you look at, or you listen to some of the folks that, follow where this midterm election may go, I think the
Mhm.
general thought is Republicans will take the House. The Senate, possibly, potentially, Republicans could take. And there are a lot of swing state elections on the Senate side. That who knows? Like, who knows where that's going to go? So, back on the confirmation votes, I don't know that I don't know that a I don't I don't know. I just don't know that a swing in the Senate it will affect those votes because
Mhm.
if it's not this person, the president will appoint another person, right? And I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know anything. I've not heard anything that's a negative for these two that are waiting on a vote.
Well, it's something we'll be watching, and it's just one of many things going on in DC when it comes to agriculture. I know there's various bills that are out there. We have stuff on the livestock side with cattle market reforms that we're watching and looking to advance through. We also have different things going on at the Supreme Court. WOTUS, that case ongoing right now. I mean, there's a lot of things happening on Capitol Hill that agriculture has a stake in, Richard.
It does, and you know, I mean, I was along with obviously hundreds of thousands of agriculturalists were pretty disappointed, you know, in EPA's decision to take another look at WOTUS. We thought that was resolved, and so yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what path that takes in the Supreme Court. And yeah, I mean, there are, you know, you talk about the livestock reporting legislation, and what does that mean? You know, that's a topic that we've been wrangling with for a long time, and I have to admit I haven't read every word of that to know exactly what's in there and what's not in there. But you're right, like there's a lot of really important issues that are, you know, that are taking place in Washington, and those, you know, those officials and those organizations and entities in Washington that are, whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's, you know, what's going on in Congress, and both on the House side and the Senate side. I do think it may be interesting, depending on how that vote goes, that midterm vote goes, and who holds the majority in the House. You know, certainly, you know, your ranking member likely will become the chairman, you know, and maybe the chairman becomes the ranking member. Who knows what happens on that side? But you know, I do believe that could change. Well, I do believe that will change the direction of some priorities, you know, from a House Ag Committee perspective. And so, you know, again, all of these things are going to be interesting. We're going to know a whole lot more in what, a month? Is that right? Yeah, a month.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, yeah, a month. Wow, it's coming right around the corner. So, you know, I do think that, you know, and I would, you know, you and I love talking about this stuff. And I would urge the listeners to pay attention to, right? Like, there's obviously a lot of outlets. This is a great one to learn about what's going on and be aware of what's going on. But you're exactly right, Jesse. There's a lot of things happening right now from a policy, you know, an executive branch, you know, administrative perspective that can change the way we do things in agriculture. And so it's a very important time. For sure.
It is a very, very important time. That is true. Richard, we've covered a lot here today. And as always, I appreciate the time and insight. Before we wrap it up, anything else we haven't mentioned that really sticks out to you this month that we need to keep our eyes on?
You know, I don't know that I do. I just, you know, in different roles I've had in the past, you know, when we get to this part of the year, you know, just a reminder to everyone, harvest, you know, and weather can certainly have a bearing on this, but harvest is stressful. It's long hours, you know. My only thing is to say, be careful out there. You know, we got a lot of big machines out on roads this time of year as well. And, you know, from the agricultural perspective, be careful. Be aware of what's going on when you're on the highways. You know, we don't want anybody hurt, and certainly don't want to, you know, tragedy to befall someone. And that really, really, really upsets things. So just be careful out there.
I couldn't agree more. And we look forward to catching up with you again here as we get into the month of November. We'll talk again. But with that, Business Growth Director of Agriculture for OBP, Osborne Bar Paramore, Richard Fordyce, always a pleasure, sir. Have a great one. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, Jesse. Great to talk to you, my friend.